Hello and welcome to Differential Discussions. I'm Melissa,
And I'm Dave.
and we're still talking about red cell morphology. Today we're going to talk about a cold agglutinin type of anemia. And this could be cold agglutinin disease, or it could just be, a cold autoantibody or a cold antibody that's associated with something else.
Mhm.
So that's what we're talking about today, is basically agglutination.
Yep, agglutination. Yeah, and some of the more severe agglutinations that we've seen, you can even see macroscopically. Recall those patients, you invert the tube a little bit,
Yep.
and you can see it's like a grainy,
Yep.
red in the side of the tube. It's
I
pretty
actually
cool.
have a slide here. You guys can't see it, but like when you look at it, you can see the graininess on the slide because it's so agglutinated. We're not looking at that one if you're all wondering. We're looking at one that's a little less agglutinated so that we can actually see agglutination versus just a giant clump of red cells.
Yeah. Really cool slide, but this one will probably be a little bit more informative because we can see some like normal red cell morphology like in the area, and then you see all these kind of groups of agglutination.
Yep.
So more or less what we have is we have an antibody that's reacting at cold temperatures. So this is something where people will only become symptomatic or have pathologies when they get into cold environments. And then it's also very consequential after the specimen's been collected, right? Tubes don't have body heat. So it becomes kind of an analysis interference to us. And there's things we might do to run the CBC and stuff. We're not going to address that here. But what we see is this kind of cross-linking of red cells to one another via these antibodies,
Yep.
likely IgM class.
Antibody antigen interaction.
Yes.
That's what agglutination is. Just want to stress that versus rouleau. Rouleau is coin stack appearance. It's red cells just kind of stacking on one another. And if I draw it out, let me get my little drawing guy, it would kind of be just red cells stacking and just kind of looking like a giant line of them versus this, where it's a giant ball of red cells clumping. So rouleau is a buildup of protein, and agglutination is antigen antibody interaction. So when you call one over the other, you're telling the physicians a different pathology. So it's important that you know the difference between rouleau and agglutination.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah, I think the only other thing is thinking about these antibodies. They're typically IgM, so they're typically cold, but cold depends on the strength of the antibody. When it's a really strong antibody, it reacts at room temp.
Mm-hmm.
Room temp is technically cold. If you think we're 37 degrees Celsius, room temp is 20 to 25 degrees Celsius. So we're going to react. The antibodies can react at that temperature if they're really, really strong. But then, like Dave was saying, a lot of them are more cold acting. So it has to actually be more cold and not just 20 to 25. So it depends on the patient. It depends on the antibody, the amount and the strength of the antibody that the patient will have. That's why sometimes you get something like this. Sometimes you get something like this slide that I was mentioning earlier. So it just varies. I think the other thing we can address, Dave, is just how this looks in the CBC.
Yeah, sure. So right away, your analyzer is going to yell at you. It's going to flag several different indices that are going to be of consequence to this grouping and clustering. So I guess I'll try not to go too nerding out here. But the analyzer, when it's counting red cells and platelets, is using something called electrical impedance. And it's a fancy way for it to see each incident, right? So each cell, quote unquote cell, and I'll tell you why I did the air quotes, and then the volume of that particular cell. So what would happen in a typical cold agglutinin like this? You run the sample at room temp cold, you're going to get a decrease, a false decrease in red cells. You're going to get a significantly elevated MCV. If we look at this particular grouping here, right? If this were to run through my analyzer, that's going to look like one huge red cell. So the analyzer is going to count that as 1 when in fact it's what, 1, 2, 3, 4, however many cells are there. So that's where you get that false decrease in the red cell. You're going to get the false increase in MCV. And then this affects anything calculated off of these values, right? So some of the indices are mathematically derived. I'm looking at UMCH. So that will be altered. Yeah, it's of consequence to many of the red cell parameters.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that's why when we are looking at these patients, it's important that we deal with them before or after you put them in the analyzer. A lot of times it depends on how severely agglutinated they are, if you'll notice it before it goes on the analyzer or not. But there's several different ways you can deal with this. Probably the most common would be just to warm the specimen.
Yep.
And rerun it. So it depends on your institution, what you're going to be doing. Like I said, there's several different ways, but that's how it'll affect the CBC. So,
yeah. Just to point out too, most analyzers will know that this is happening to some extent. The hemoglobin result will be virtually unaffected by this phenomena. The hematocrit will be totally affected. And so the rule of 3, if we could say, it's not a real rule, but you get approximately 3% hematocrit per gram of hemoglobin present. And when that ratio is way out of whack, the analyzer goes, wait, what? This doesn't make sense.
Yep. Yeah.
Cool.
And so then this is what it looks like.
Yeah. And this is actually going to be maybe a briefer kind of a video, because a lot of the morphology is hidden from us, isn't it?
Yep. Yeah. So I mean, you can see that there are some normal red cells here, and it does look like they have 1/3 central pallor. So they do look relatively normal, the ones that we can see. Now, I guess it is important to point out that you can kind of see these little shiny marks here, 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 here. There's a whole bunch of them around. It's just watermarks. It's from the staining process. Let me just play with the fine tune so that you can see that they're kind of shiny. Yeah, you see they kind of look like little black marks right there. So that's just something we ignore. It just happens sometimes with staining.
Yeah, rarely do you have to make a whole new slide, but we see it and we just know to kind of look past it and ignore it as much as we can.
So we have a neutrophil.
We do.
Neutrophil
hanging out.
And then other than that, we have a lot of agglutination.
Yeah, yep. And, like we say, that, for all we know, there could be a bunch of dacryocytes, a bunch of teardrops floating around in these piles, but we won't be able to see them. So I would imagine some institutions might have procedures for, how to report this, and that might vary from place to place.
Yeah, absolutely.
I've read in the literature, you can warm the slide, warm the sample before making the push prep, so you can get a look at the red cells as they are. But then, part of me also wants to make sure that agglutination is reported, right? Like, we have to tell the clinician that this phenomena is going on. They want to know that they have like a cold agglutinin, a possible cold agglutinin or something.
Absolutely. So you need to report out the agglutination in some way, shape, or form, that even regardless of if once you clear the agglutination, so that you can run it and look at it and get the real results, but you still need to report the agglutination.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let me just move to another field so that we can get some other looks at what agglutination looks like.
Sure. And while you look around, I'll just do what I do best and blow hot air at everybody. So yeah, we're looking around, we're looking at these clumps of cells. We're seeing what we can see, but like I said, a lot of that might be kind of just hidden by the agglutination. There might be a little bit of polychrome. I think I see a couple of cells, maybe. This one here looks like kind of a bluish tint to it.
Yeah. But other than that, really, and that one wouldn't be enough to call.
No, certainly not. Yeah.
But
Agglutination also kind of, I think most of the time is a qualitative finding. I would imagine someone may be able to put a plus scale on something like that if they really dreamt to, but it's more you just kind of say it's there, it's not. And sometimes it can be quite subtle, right, Melissa?
Yeah.
Definitely seen agglutinations that are like,
Yep.
a mono.
Yeah, mono. There's a mono here. Mono. And then a bunch of agglutination.
Bunch of agglutination. Yep.
All right, let's go one more. It's more agglutination.
Yeah.
So again, depending on the severity of the agglutinin, you may see some more red cell morphology. You may not be able to see it. It depends again on how severe the agglutinin is. I think for this slide, we would just call agglutination as present. All right, well, thanks for watching.
Thank you. See ya.
Please like, subscribe, and hit the bell if you'd like notifications whenever we post a new video. And feel free to reach out to us on social media or via email with comments or suggestions about future content. Thanks.